Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this event. I'm Christine Blower, comrades and friends, and I'm really looking forward to getting on with hearing from so many people this afternoon. We've had thousands of people who've registered, and we will be streaming on Twitter and Facebook and all the usual channels. So I'm sure that our message will get to a very great number of people. Let me say, to coin a phrase, the party is nearly over for Boris Johnson, and we're here to say Johnson out. But not just Johnson. Let's get rid of this whole appalling Tory offensive on all of our rights, on our health, on our education, on our communities, on our jobs, on our livelihoods. On the left, it's absolutely vital that we stand together at this time and that we are at the heart of organising and amplifying the voices of all of those campaigns that there are out there. These strands of the progressive anti-Tory resistance, which are the trade unions, the people organising in our localities and our communities, we must stand together because we have, the Tories have had one of the worst and most reactionary responses to the pandemic. And we can see that in our communities every day. They don't have anywhere near the agenda that we need to deal with the climate emergency, and they're completely silent on the whole deepening cost of living crisis. And they're using the pandemic, as we all very well know, to further the economy in the interests of their people, the super rich, while attacking the opportunities for the rest of us to resist. But we mustn't let them get away with it. We have to build the resistance. To look at the donate link so that Arise can continue to host events like this. They're really important. They're important for lifting our spirits. They're important for making sure that we work together, and they're important for organising. So one of the other things that you can do is sign the important Workers Can't Wait petition to Rishi Sunak on the cost of living crisis. So I'm delighted now to move on to hearing those voices from the front line of resistance and from the front line of organising against these Tory attacks, coming together to amplify all the voices that you raise in your own communities. And let's make sure that all of those social movements and complete community organizations are actually struggling together. We've got our event themed into a couple of different kinds of sections. And the first one is organising in our communities, workplaces and beyond, resisting the Tories. All of our speakers will have 3 minutes with the exception of a couple of them. And the first, who is going to have 6 minutes, is John Mcdonnell Mp, who needs no introduction, but I'm just going to say, people love to hear from you, John. So do I. Over to you.
Thanks, Christine. And I'll try and abide by your stricture of 6 minutes. I want to explain what this conference is all about. I want to take up what you've just said. Look, of course, the Johnson regime is in crisis. The lies, the corruption, the incompetence of Johnson, they're beginning to catch up with him. But the liar may cling on, or they might make him an offer which he can't refuse, and they'll find a way out for him so he can make the fortune he's always wanted to make. But then they'll simply replace him with another corrupt Tory crony, and the Tory regime will go on. But what should really give us hope is exactly as you've said, Christine. There's something else going on at the moment as well. There's something more fundamental in the air. And it's not much reported in the sort of groveling media, mainstream media that we have in this country, but it's still happening. And also, to be frank, you won't have witnessed it on the front benches of the Labour Party, who seem to be more interested in attacking Jeremy and colluding with right-wing Tory extremists than attacking the Tory party. But nevertheless, across the country, people are beginning to stand up and be countered. So where the main political opposition in Parliament has been weak in its opposition, for example, to the government's full frontal assault on our civil liberties, the police bill, and the nationality bill, people across the country have shown how to mount real opposition. And they've done it on the streets, in the marches, in the demonstrations, and in the lobbies. And the result is that many of you and many others, by your actions, you've forced fence-sitting politicians to actually act against this legislation. And in the same way, all those campaigns supporting Extinction Rebellion, the Black Lives Matter, the women's movement, trans rights, they've not gone away. They're mostly simply planning for the next wave of action when the next spark lights the fire. On the industrial front, there's a new wave of radicalism, and it's swept through the trade union movement. After a decade of austerity, frozen wages, massive growth in casualised labour, people have just had enough. And they're mobilising on a fresh scale. With the loss of the election in 2019 and the arrival of a new Labour leadership, many people have lost confidence in the political route to improving their lives. So instead, what we're seeing is trade unions creatively and effectively recruiting and mobilising for action. Often, this has meant overcoming the resistance of some of the bureaucrats within those unions, more interested in their own wages than the wages and conditions of their members. And the result, at the moment, in dispute after dispute, unions are fighting back, they're winning battles to protect and improve the living standards of their members. And what's been brilliant in this recent period, increasingly we're seeing unions working together in solidarity. There's a new trade unionism in action at the moment that we need to recognise and support. Nevertheless, we have to face up to the reality for many of our communities. There are 8 million people living in poverty, plus 4 million children, nearly 2 million pensioners. Most of those children, 2/3 of them, are living in families where someone's at work. And what we're now faced is inflation rising anything between 5 and 7%, energy prices rocketing, and it's tough for many people. And that's why the new mobilizations of groups like ACORN, the Renters Union, DPAC, Disabled People Against the Cuts, and Ian Byrne's fantastic Right to Food campaign, they're all so critically important, fighting for people so that they can survive and so that we can, well, end Food Bank Britain that we have at the moment. So in today's conference, we'll be hearing from the front line of many of those campaigns and struggles. The scale of resistance to Johnson and the policies that this Tory government have launched upon our community, the scale of that resistance is impressive and needs to be recognised. So the question for us today is, how do we work in solidarity? Networking to build, again, an irresistible movement for radical change. So our objective, it isn't just to rid this country of Johnson and get rid of the Tories, but more critically in discussions today, how do we lay the foundations in struggle of the political movement that we now need to build that social society that we aim for? Solidarity. Thanks, Christine.
Thank you very much, John. That was a brilliant opening and well in time. I'm now going to call our second speaker. It's Sarah Woolley, General Secretary of the Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union, a union that's always prepared to take a stand and be out there defending members and whose members worked so brilliantly throughout the worst of the pandemic. Sarah, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Christine, and thank you for the invitation to join you this afternoon in a very windy Wakefield, so I apologise for the background noise. What an amazing platform to be part of. It's truly a privilege to be here representing the BFAWU. We live in the 5th richest nation in the world, yet, as John mentioned, millions of people are reliant on food banks, are freezing and are living in absolute poverty. Many of them are like Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union members, key workers that have been and continue to keep the nation going, yet are going to bed hungry and cold, wondering how they're going to manage another week until payday because they aren't paid enough to survive. And let's be clear, we know there is more than enough food to go around, that energy prices could be better controlled than they currently are, but the government has made a political choice to push more and more working class people into poverty whilst they get richer, working multiple jobs on top of an MP's wage that many of our members could only dream of earning, whilst our communities are stripped of resources due to cutbacks and people are literally dying as a result. And we can't wait for the Tories to be voted out. That's unlikely to happen for a while, thanks to the repeated failings of the current leadership of the Labour Party to show there is an alternative because they're too busy infighting. Johnson might not be popular right now, thanks to Partygate, but we know the public will soon forget that. And that's where we as trade unions need to be there and we need to step up. We need to work together across the movement, supporting each other's campaigns. I'm speaking at a PCS rally in a couple of weeks and talking to our members and reps about the power we have when we stand together collectively, giving them the resources to challenge the myths and lies spread by the Tories and the right-wing media that they've done a good job through the pandemic. Because there will be people in our members' workplaces that believe that they have, and we need them to organise. We need to organise our workplaces, our industries as a whole, and communities. We need to engage with community organisations like the Ron Todd Foundation or Zero Hours Justice, for example, share resources, and as a result, make sure we can reach as many people as we possibly can. Because when we stand together as a movement and a class, concentrate on what we have in common rather than the things that divide us, we are powerful. And that's why the Tories have enacted the final stage of their anti-trade union legislation, introducing the certification officer levy in an attempt to hinder us. But you only have to look at the members at DVLA at PCS, UCU, the community members, Clark Strike, the rail unions that have got a battle to come, and many more to know that it's not going to work because our members deserve better. In order to achieve change, though, we need to do it together. There's no other way. So if you're watching this and not in a trade union, join one and organise your workplace. Support action taking place in your communities, whatever trade union that may be, and let's push back together in solidarity to make things better for our class. Thanks, Christine.
Thank you very much for that message, Sarah. That's brilliant. And now we move speedily on to our next speaker, Mark Serwotka, PCS General Secretary, whose union has already been mentioned. So over to you, Mark. It may be that we haven't got Mark with us quite yet. I thought I had a message saying we had. So what I'm going to do, I'm sorry, so I'm going to change the order. I'm going to take Helen O'Connor from the People's Assembly, and then perhaps we can hear Mark after that.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Comrades, we're in the midst of a crisis that is going to drive living conditions back towards the Victorian era for many more people in this country. Working class people are being expected to pay the costs for the COVID-19 crisis. Not content with cutting the real value of our wages, this government also wants to cut the social wage too, our NHS, free education, our public services. We're seeing legislation go through Parliament at the moment that will hand the keys of the NHS over to the multinational companies. The Tories are also preparing for the backlash they know that's coming their way. They know working people will fight back. This is why they're attacking our democratic rights, including the right to protest, while condemning authoritarian regimes elsewhere. They're giving themselves the powers that any dictator would dream of. COVID-19 has accelerated a crisis that was long in the making before the pandemic. Crisis is built into the fabric of this economic system. Many are rightly calling for Johnson to go, but our demand must be get rid of the lot of them. Despite their 80-seat majority, this government is every bit as unstable as the system they seek to justify and defend. And many will never forgive that they continued partying while people died. But we cannot expect anyone to come over the hill and rescue us. Defeating the Tories and the profiteers is something we must do ourselves. Fightbacks are already taking place, as with the GMB union bin workers dispute. The G4S workers are kicking off their dispute for pay justice next Monday, 12 p.m. outside Croydon University Hospital. I'm calling on absolutely everyone to get behind these brave GMB members. Let's remember, campaigning works. Action gets results. Yes, we can win, but individual battles won't do it. We need to organise ourselves properly. We need to build the biggest and widest campaign possible. And that means organising in our communities, in our trade unions, and building alliances. And the Tories will always aim to divide. And we must absolutely reject arguments that divide our class. Our movement must lead the battle to defend free speech, not allow the right wing to steal this from underneath our noses. And anybody who's seriously organising in our trade unions and communities knows there's a growing mood out there. Mistreated people have had enough. So there's big battles ahead. We must build bastions of resistance in every workplace and every community. And I believe also that we as a movement need to address the issue of effective political representation for our class. We must reject the idea there's no alternative to the current system and advocate and fight for a genuine alternative that will not just resist the Tories, but offers our class the hope of a better world, a socialist alternative. Thank you, in solidarity.
Thank you very much, Helen. Brilliant timing and a great contribution. Bastions of resistance, that's what we need. So let's move now to Mark Serwotka, who is with us, who I'm sure will be talking about building bastions of resistance. Mark, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Christine, and thanks very much for the invite. And it's a pleasure to follow those fantastic speeches that we've heard. So two things really I just want to focus on in the 3 minutes. And that is how to build a resistance. And we need to go more than just asking for Johnson to be out. And with every passing day that we witness, the scale and the consequence of the defeat at the general election, and then it has to be said, the defeat of the left by the election of Keir Starmer in Labour, as is witnessed in all its tragic consequences. I have never lived under a government that is like this one, where the Prime Minister routinely lies, blames everybody else other than himself, and is now throwing out right-wing red meat policies that affect migrants coming to this country, people on welfare, people who need our public services, whilst blaming the service users and the people rather than taking political responsibility. And with an 80-seat majority, even if he goes, he will be replaced with a mini-me who may be a bit more competent, will be equally right-wing. So our aim is not just to remove Boris Johnson and the government, and it is not just to get a Labour Party in government that tinkers. It is to fundamentally fight back, to defeat the cost of living crisis, to have a public sector run in the public sector with decent wages, and to have resources that are needed in all parts of the country to take us from this dreadful situation that we are in. And therefore, there's a couple of things that I think we should commit to doing. On a broad basis, we have to support each other in struggle. In our own union, we have won countless disputes this year and had countless ballots. I see Unite the Union under Sharon Graham have more disputes now than any time in their history. We've heard about some of the other disputes. We've got to support them. And by the way, when we have a dispute with a Labour council in Coventry, where the right wing are trying to unseat the fabulous Zara Sultana and are bringing in agency workers to defeat a public sector strike, we should condemn it and mobilise to support the workers in Coventry against the actions of the appalling Labour council. So we need to unite. We are now moving to a national consultative ballot of all our public sector members over the question of pay and pensions. To build for that, we're having rallies in every region and nation, joined by trade union leaders like Sarah, Joe Grady, and Kevin Courtney, and many others, and inviting local people from disputes and campaigns. We're also joining up with campaigning organisations. Next week, we're in the High Court seeking an injunction with Care for Calais to stop Priti Patel's policy of pushbacks leading to deaths in the Channel. We're also talking to welfare groups to see if we can bring a legal challenge against the government making the lives of people on universal credit infinitely worse in the days ahead by forcing people to now look further for jobs outside their expertise or have their benefits removed in total. So we're fighting back industrially and through the courts. But finally, I want to say that in building those links with the People's Assembly, with community and campaigning organisations and other unions, that gives us hope that we can fight back. But we're in the Labour movement. We also have to be clear that we will not keep our heads down. And whether it's Zara Sultana, whether it's Jeremy Corbyn, we should be saying as a left, we will not keep our heads down and do what we're told by Keir Starmer. We will support anything it takes to keep Jeremy Corbyn as the MP for Islington. We will support all those left MPs who are under attack. And frankly, whether it's a Labour council in Coventry or a Tory government where workers are under attack, we will unite to fight with them in order to win. I hope that's something that we can all agree in the discussions today. Let's take the fight to them, the sooner the better.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. Very, very clear there that we have to take the fight to them wherever they are. Comrades, there are thousands of people joining us online and more still coming in. And now I'm going to go to Sam Browse, who's an Arise volunteer, who's just going to say a few words about the fact that what a great organisation Arise is, and also how we need your money if you've got any spare. Sam.
Yeah, hi everyone, and thanks, Christine. Yeah, so first thing first, I want to say four things to remember. First things first, please hit that donate button. Please, please, please. The way we fund these events, the publicity for them, the technology for them, and all the rest that goes into it is through donations. We're entirely donation funded, so please hit that donate button. I say this every time we have these kind of calls, but our opponents have millions of pounds in the bank. They've got media friends. We've got each other. So it's vital we help each other. The second thing, to encourage you to sign the Workers Can't Wait petition, which should be appearing in the chat soon. That's our Workers Can't Wait petition, saying basically Rishi Sunak needs to take action to tackle the cost of living crisis and deal with things like a pay rise, deal with things like statutory sick pay, deal with things like access to education, a Green New Deal, and all those other things that are so important, and the pandemic's shown us are so important to run our society properly and humanely. So make sure you sign our Workers Can't Wait petition. The third thing is really to flag Labour Outlook, our media partner. Labour Outlook is a sort of Labour left news and views site. We publish stories from across the movement, everything from trade union struggles, stories about demos and campaigning, and also articles from our fantastic Socialist campaign group of MPs. So make sure you check out Labour Outlook. There's all sorts going on there, and it's a really good way of updating yourself on the best ideas and the newest things that are happening in the world and on the left. And the fourth thing, I don't know if I forgot to mention it, but please donate. we like I say, we need resources to run events like this. So please hit that donate button. And hopefully we'll see you at more events like this in the future. Thanks so much, Christine, and have a great rally.
That's great, Sam. Thank you very much. And just in case you didn't hear him say it, please do donate if you possibly can. So we've done our organising section, and I'm sure everyone's really riled up, but now we're moving on to the Kill the Bill section, defend our right to protest. I hope that my friend and comrade Shami Chakrabarti is on the call. I'm going to call her now to speak if she is, but I'm not getting I'm not getting an indication that she definitely is. Shami, are you there? If not, we'll call you in later. Maybe not. Okay, in that case, I'm going to move to Marvina Newton from the Kill the Bill Coalition and United for Black Lives and Black Lives Matter Leeds. Marvina, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. First of all, I want to thank all our comrades for all the hard work you've made and done to make sure we amplify the Kill the Bill campaign. The Kill the Bill campaign is a coalition that is just a beautiful way of fighting back this corrupt, fascist government. When we say Tory out, we say it with all our heart. They try to divide us and try to kill our voices by putting us against each other. But what they didn't realize is that we were seeds. And when they tried to bury us, we grew up. And we built unlikely allyships across movements. We have movements from the GRT to the Black Lives Matter movement to the environmental space, with young people's voices being amplified in ways that we can't even understand. Today we call and we say, it's time for us to unite more than ever. Solidarity means, for me, being able to see my comrade brothers and sisters in the struggle and say, how can I be of best service to you? How do I amplify the voices of all those who are marginalized and disadvantaged and oppressed by this government? For me, I feel Boris Johnson is a waste man, a liar from the beginning of the time he opens his mouth to the time he goes to bed. You can never understand why someone like that can get away with the atrocities of what he's done to the system. We've seen in his power and Priti Patel's voices, the more migrants and disadvantaged communities have been abused in this process. We call for our unions to see ways to work with the community. Let's take this conversation. Let's build our resources. Let's work together to amplify each other's voices. Allyship is simple. Act when you see the inequality, acknowledge that there's a problem, and advocate for change. The L is for you to listen. Listen to the voices of those who are oppressed and look at ways that you can build and learn from it. The other L is to learn and unlearn your own unconscious biases that takes you out of your echo chambers to see how you can build movements and movements. And this is the last bit that you need to remember the most. The why. The why is for you to yield. Yield your privilege and power. And this is a word that makes people feel uncomfortable. We all have privilege by any means necessary, even whether we're working class, even if we're women, if we're men. But some people have more privilege than others. By acknowledging that and using and yielding that privilege to ensure that you amplify the voices of each other's campaign, it's a great way for us to win. We definitely want the Tories out, but we also want to make sure we have a Labour force that is ready, and Keir Starmer needs to be able to leave that position for someone else to come in that we respect in the community. So that means more community education, more reaching into the communities, more working with the unions and solidarity. It is not an oppression Olympics. We all need to stand with each other, and we can get the Tories out. Thank you.
Marvina, that was absolutely great. Thank you very much indeed. Amplifying the voices of others and listening to others and yielding your privilege. That's something that we really all do need to think about. Excellent, thank you. Okay, so we now move to Chris Peace. Now, here is a person of immense resilience and resistance. She's speaking on behalf of the Orgreave Truth and Justice campaign. The floor is yours, Chris.
Thank you so much to inviting us to have a voice on this immense platform. It's an honour to be here and an honour to be speaking on behalf of the Orgreave Truth and Justice campaign. This government has shown that it wants to silence those who criticise it, and they will continue to erode our capacity to try to hold them to account at the ballot box, in Parliament, in the courts, and yes, on the streets. So we are a working class injustice that's 38 years old this year, but it's so relevant to what's happening in Tory Britain today. The police tactics back on the 18th of June 1984 during the miners' strike at the Orgreave coking plant, which is just down the road from where I'm now sitting, speaking to you, it was unprecedented. And those that were there on the receiving end of paramilitary style police operations, it cannot be easily forgotten by them, let alone forgiven. And some still bear the scars physically and emotionally. Many more still carry the anger and knowledge about what that day at Orgreave was all about, really. And that was the Tory government's determination to crush the trade union movement and replace a country of organised labour with their model of privatisation, casualisation and a race to the bottom. And indeed, Johnson's Britain today that we live in is in fact the Thatcher government's dream, sadly. The Orgreave campaign has always made the point that the subsequent policing of protest continue to suffer because of the immunity the police enjoy over not being held to account for what happened at Orgreave. Now, when we handed in this submission back in December 2015, we made the case that there needed to be some kind of inquiry into Orgreave. And when it was refused in 2016, one of the reasons given, and just hang on to your hats here, was because the police had got nothing new to learn. Yes, that's what the then Home Secretary actually said. Now, we know how bad the policing bill is, but I just want to remind everybody that Orgreave wasn't just about the police. And this current policing bill isn't just about policing. Both Orgreave and what we have on our hands now in this bill is the unholy trinity of state, police and media drilling down on anyone who shows dissent. And there will be dissent. If this government continues to peddle racist policies, there will be dissent. If it gives and continues to give the far-right fascists a voice, there will be dissent. And if they don't tackle climate change, there will be dissent. And let's just look at trade unions' actions now and how there will be dissent. Refuse the nurses a proper pay rise, there'll be dissent. Public service workers, 7.5%, not enough. But take heart and look at how trade unions are taking and gaining support for their industrial action within the community. For example, look at the amazing work across England, Scotland, Ireland and Wales that Unite Union scaffolders have shown this week. Because trade unions and community coming together, well, it reminds you a bit about the miners' strike, doesn't it?
Can you wind up now, please, Chris?
Real action supported like that is important. We stand together. We don't let the fear of not having our voices stop us showing dissent. We fought state repression before, we'll continue, and we'll see you on the streets. And so thank you so much for letting me speak, and solidarity, everyone.
That's great, Chris. Thank you very much indeed. And we may get to Shami if she's able to join us, but for now, we're going to move on to the linked issue of how we defend workers' rights and trade union rights. And our speaker in this section is John Hendy QC. He's a Labour peer in the House of Lords. It says here he's a campaigner with the Institute of Employment Rights. He is so much more than that. He's our foremost Labour lawyer. I'm delighted you're on, John. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chris. Comrades, we need to fight back, as many speakers have said this afternoon. The working class face a perfect storm. Take the issue of wages. The rate of inflation, in other words, the rate at which the value of the pound in your pocket gets smaller each year, is now calculated at 5.4% per annum. But that's the average. It may be correct for those with lots of pounds in their pockets, but it's not accurate for those who spend most of their pounds on food, rent, heating, and cooking. The rate of inflation of these items is much greater than 5.4%, as everybody listening in today knows. And so the real value of wages in the UK for those on or below the medium rate of earnings, which is about £500 a week. Median earnings, by the way, that's the halfway point. Half the population earns less than £500 a week and half earns more. So for those who are on or below the £500 a week figure, the value of their wages is dropping dramatically. The rich, of course, are getting richer and equality is increasing. So we need to fight back. That is a job for the trade unions, as many trade union speakers have said and will say this afternoon. It's a job for the trade unions driven by their members, and every worker should be a member of a trade union. It can be done, even though trade unions and their members have one arm tied behind their back by legal red tape. The fact is that the law has smashed up the one mechanism that can drive up real wages, that is collective bargaining. For decades before the Tories took over in 1979, 85% of British workers had their terms and conditions set by a collective agreement negotiated by their unions. Now the percentage is less than 25%. That means that less than 1 in 4 workers have a voice at work. And 3/4 of British workers' terms and conditions are set by the employers on a take it or leave it basis. The law has also disemboweled the right to strike in so many ways that I just haven't got time to deal with it this afternoon. And the attack continues. The police bill has been mentioned, and its restrictions on demonstrations. That bill, amongst many sections of the community at which it's aimed, is particularly aimed at the right to picket. I can't go into the details now, but it will have a dramatic impact on the right to picket for the future. And just last week, my colleagues in the Socialist Campaign Group in the House of Commons were fighting against 2 pieces of legislation which emanate from the Trade Union Act of 2016, which impose a tax on trade unions to pay for a state official called a certification officer, who is given even greater powers to investigate and to fine trade unions. But one small ray of hope in Parliament this week is, I'm very pleased to tell you that yesterday, Friday, my bill on the status of workers, which means that all workers will have this all employment rights from day one, past the hurdle of the House of Lords and now goes to the House of Commons. But we have a plan, and that plan was set out in a New Deal for Workers by a task group chaired by Andy McDonald of the Socialist Campaign Group, with a bit of help from the Institute of Employment Rights. Since last September, it is Labour Party policy, but we must make sure that it stays Labour Party policy. It deals with all aspects of the law at work. So in Parliament, we will go on fighting for the New Deal to get the legal space in which trade unions can represent their members. The important thing is that the struggle continues on all fronts, not just legal, not just industrial, and not just demonstration in the street, but all fronts. The workers' fight is the renters' fight, the fight of the unemployed, the fight of the disabled, the fight of those who are discriminated against, the fight of those who struggle against climate change and for a green transition. We need coordination, and this meeting this afternoon is part of that. We need solidarity, we need self-belief, and we will win. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, John. Great contribution. It's true, we need to fight on every single front. Luckily, there are a lot of us to do it. In our next session, we move to fighting for what we're doing to fight for public services, so publicly owned, publicly delivered services on all fronts. And our first speaker is Dr. Sonia Adesara from Keep Our NHS Public. The floor is yours, Sonia.
Good afternoon, everyone. So in 2019, it was December 2019, I was working a night shift in A&E. And we had a young boy brought in by ambulance. He was having a asthma attack, and we did everything we could, but it was too late. He died in our department. And I mention this today because in the UK, we have the highest childhood asthma deaths in Europe. Over the past few years, the number of children being admitted to our hospitals with breathing problems has increased. And that's because in areas of the country like where I work, we have more children who are growing up in poverty, with poor nutrition, poor housing conditions, poor air quality, in conditions that are making our children sick. And that cycle of ill health, we see that cycle continues into adulthood. And breaking that cycle is not easy, but that's the type of policies that I believe we on the left need to be thinking about as we plan for the next government. Secondly, I think we have to also be honest now that there are too many people who are receiving inadequate care and who are being let down by the NHS. Now, everyone on this call will know why that's happening. Our NHS has been deliberately failed. It has been deliberately, systematically underfunded for many years. We have seen NHS workers being driven out by exhaustion and derogatory pay cuts. And we have had decades of neoliberal marketisation that has left our NHS weak and fragmented. But the consequence of this is that and I'm seeing this, that the public are starting to lose faith in the NHS. And we are seeing more and more people choosing to go private, those that can afford it. And even if this has not affected you personally, this is really serious, because if we start to see that strong collective solidarity that this country has for our NHS, if that starts to disintegrate, then it's game over. And you will see the floodgates will open, and those that want to exploit and profit from ill health, you'll see them seeping in. Now, finally, we've already today heard some great ideas, some great visions of what type of country and society that we all want to live in. But remember, and I have to remind myself about this, when Bevan created the NHS, he was told that his idea was crazy, socialist, pie in the sky thinking. But look where we are today. So don't let yourself have the ceilings on your aspirations. But we also need to remember that fight for the NHS and the creation of the NHS, that was not an easy fight. And we need to have that same courage, that same boldness, that same self-belief in our values, and that same fire in our fight if we want to win again today. Thank you very much.
Sonia, that's absolutely great. And of course, some of you will know that the Health and Care Bill is proceeding through Parliament at the moment. So the very least thing that you could do is write to your MP about some of the appalling provisions that that will bring in. But actually, we do need to be on the streets, and we do need to be defending our absolute right to an NHS properly publicly funded and properly publicly delivered. We move now to education, which of course is to which I feel very close. And our next speaker is Louise Regan, a comrade and friend of mine from the National Education Union. The floor is yours, Louise.
Hi, Christine. Very good to see
Hi.
you. I hope you can all hear me okay. I'm sorry, I'm in my car. I'm in Telford protesting against racists. So I've just jumped back into the car to join this, but I have been listening to the brilliant speeches so far. So I'm one of the national officers from the National Education Union. It's been really good to hear what other people have talked about in terms of trade unionism and activism, and completely agree that people need to be in trade unions. I think COVID really shone a light on the attacks on the education sector. And I think our members showed truly their will to fight back against what was a dreadful management of COVID by this government, and which culminated in us holding one of the biggest trade union meetings I think ever held, with over 20,000 members online and many, many others joining us, but also that who then went out in force using Section 44 to ensure that schools were closed to the majority of children to keep our communities safe. And I think there's just a couple of things before I move on I want to say. One, schools never closed during the pandemic, despite many people saying schools were closed. Schools were never closed. They were always open to key worker children. And our members continued to put themselves at risk, education workers going in day after day to support those children, often doing things way over and above taking out food parcels and supporting children and families. Since that time, our membership has grown and we continue our fight. We've got members taking action currently against academisation, which has fragmented our school system and is something which is causing huge problems in the education sector. Currently, members taking action over workload, again, something which is driving educators out of the system, and we can all see the impact that that is having in our schools. And also to protect their pensions. We've got a massive turnout in our independent sector ballot just this week, seeing members fighting back against the right for them to pay into their pension being removed. I'll end with this though, Christine. You know, it is essential that we work together, and many people on this call have said that. I'm very proud that, and I know that many National Education Union members turn up on other trade union picket lines to stand in solidarity. I do myself, and I know many others do, and I know many other trade unionists come and support us in our fights. And it is that supporting and standing together that shows true solidarity and shows the strength that we have. And we have to remember that an injury to one is an injury to all. There have been some great ideas. We have to stand in solidarity. We have to fight back against what this government is doing. Solidarity all.
Fantastic, Louise. Thank you so much. I'm always delighted when we have any youth speakers, because of course that is my union. Right, we move now to Kirsty Turkingdon, who is from the Care and Support Workers organisation. I know that in my home borough of Hammersmith and Fulham, there's a lot going on about attempting to organise care workers. So I'm really pleased that we've got someone on to speak on that. So over to you, Kirsty.
Hello everyone, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I'm Kirsty. I'm one of the chairs of Care and Support Workers Organise. For the next 5 minutes, I'm going to talk about the pandemic, privatisation, and I really wish I could have thought of a last point that started with a P, but my final point will be the importance of collective action. If the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that it's not the Richard Bransons and Elon Musks that keep society running, it's the working class. From cleaners to shop assistants, teachers, refuge workers, and of course, care and support workers, it turns out we are the ones who are essential. In the long months of the lockdown, many of us made huge sacrifices, working long hours and extra shifts to cover for isolating colleagues, using our unpaid free time to wait in long queues so service users wouldn't be without food. We battled for PPE, and some of us even having to make do with bin bags. The only COVID tests that I had for the first year of the pandemic were only because I got randomly selected for an Office of National Statistics study. I got my face masks of my neighbour Keith, who'd been dropped off a box of 50,000 from some Vietnamese communists who had given these to their comrades in Scotland to distribute amongst key workers. Were it not for our trade unions and informal support networks, we'd probably have never been supplied with adequate protective clothing and regular testing. It was out of these demands that we formed Care and Support Workers Organise, a network of carers across Britain demanding better for the care system and for care and support workers. We work alongside trade unions to put the voice of care workers, and in particular our demand for £15 an hour minimum wage, at the heart of our agenda. Many of us went above and beyond government guidelines, with some care workers even moving into the residential homes that they worked. We were terrified that we could unknowingly transmit a virus to the people in our care or bring it back to our home and to our families. Yet at number 10, once they'd stopped clapping for the cameras, they parted behind closed doors. They quaffed wine and then later cracked jokes about it, while more than 1,000 health and care workers lost their lives by simply doing their jobs. Now, almost 2 years on from the first lockdown, it's back to the same old failed pre-pandemic normal for care workers. Our sector remains on the brink of collapse, with more than 110,000 vacant care jobs in England, with a further 10,000 in Scotland. We're one of the lowest paid sectors in the UK, and the majority of us are on minimum wage. Cuts to universal credit means that many of us just can't afford to do the job we love anymore. The pandemic didn't cause this problem though. It merely put it in the national spotlight. The roots can be traced back to the early 1990s, where in a bid to cut costs, the Tory governments transferred the social care sector into corporate hands. And costs were indeed cut by slashing staffing levels and slashing our wages, effectively halving them over the next 30 years. And having introduced the policy to cut costs, the Tories now say that the fact that care is privatised means they're powerless to give us a pay rise. Instead, we've been given a pitiful rise in the minimum wage, which will soon be more than cancelled out by soaring energy prices, inflation, and the increase of national insurance. We have an ageing population. The shortage of care workers long predates the pandemic, but rather than recognising that the first step to solving the care crisis is to pay care workers a decent wage, the Tories in London and the SNP and Green coalition up here in Scotland will make any excuse to keep things how they are. Just as the pandemic shone a light on who the essential workers are, it's also illuminated the ugly flaws of a privatised care sector. The bosses of private companies and the UK government both refuse to take responsibility for PPE, leaving workers without. Privately owned care homes have recorded some of the highest coronavirus deaths. Despite an appalling loss of life at its care homes, the private company, HC1, has raised fees for the remaining residents, whilst stashing its profits in the Cayman Islands, all while treasuring tens of millions in public funds. In Rutherglen, South Lanarkshire, the care home which recorded the second highest number of COVID deaths in Scotland is run by a company called Advinia. When large numbers of patients died from COVID, management at the care home used this to justify not recruiting additional staff. If you live in England, I'd forgive you for thinking the care system in Scotland, and in particular, the recent announcement of a national care service, is the kind of thing worth aiming for. After all, its name is lifted straight from the mouths of grassroots campaigners who've been calling for a state-funded service available to everyone. Of course, the £800 million which has been pledged is obviously welcome in a desperately underfunded sector, alongside promises to remove charges for non-residential care. But creeping privatisation is still creeping privatisation, even if it's wearing a tartan face mask. And
I'm going to wind you up in a minute, because you're over time, I'm afraid. But carry on.
So anyway, there's no promise from Nicola Sturgeon to remove the profit motive from care. She promised that in 2020, and there's not a single sign of it. So we can kiss goodbye to any prospect of standards, decent wages, and quality of care. Our message is this: if you value care, you must value carers. And we're not just saying it, we're organising it and demanding it, because power concedes to nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. So I invite you to join us. Care and support workers organise in our fight. If care workers win, everyone wins. Solidarity.
Fantastic, Kirsty. Great use of the Frederick Douglass quote. I love that one. And now we're going to be, just before we move to our next speaker, I just want to say that we had apologies from Manuel Cortez, who would have loved to have been with us. And we've had apologies from the London Renters Union, who would have also liked to have been with us in this section. But our last speaker in this section is Paul Holmes, the current president of Unison. Paul, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. The title of the meeting is a bit old hat now, because Boris Johnson's just a dead man walking. He'll be gone within the next 2 or 3 months. But what's happened, and this is the massive mistake the Tories have made. I went for my haircutting a couple of weeks ago, which in of itself is not a particularly interesting event. But everybody in the barbers who would normally just sit there reading the paper or looking at the phone were talking about us and them and how people are treated. He's opened a public discussion, which I didn't expect him to do. And I think we ought to be careful about what language we use, because I've heard people talking, Tories and Labour, about competition. There's not one single Tory MP or multinational believes in competition. They believe in backhanders and being given contracts. And I think, the joke about what happened at 10 Downing Street about the parties, the police at the front of 10 Downing Street and the police at the back of 10 Downing Street, everybody knows what went on, but the big debate is not taking place in Downing Street. It's taking place in the supermarkets and in the shops. From next April, the Financial Times say this morning, the average working family's bills will increase between £25 and £30 a week. That's energy prices, that's petrol, that's the rising national insurance, which will apply to pensioners and never has done before. And that's not getting rid of the triple lock pension for which is a scheme. So the absolute massive rise. And whilst the health and local government workers have settled for poor pay rises this year, they're on the point of submitting this year's pay claim now. There's no respite to it. And they're going to be submitting it, like John Hendy said, with 5.8 and higher inflation. We've got to talk about real things. There's a bin dispute every week in this country now. That's about wages, that's about poverty. And it's often in private companies. And the intelligentsia, and I thought George Orwell's description of intelligentsia is the best I've ever heard. People who complain about everything, but want to change nothing. And I think that's the essence of this meeting, really. We want to change things. Can I tell you, as a Unison member and as a Unison president, our members are shattered. They're shattered in care homes, they're shattered in home care, they're shattered in the health service. There's 100,000 vacancies in the health service. There's between 50 and 70,000 health workers being given the notice next week if they've not had COVID jabs. How are they going to deal with that level of absenteeism? And the stuff about the red wall and people have come to be Tories, it's not true. I studied all 54 seats that Labour lost in England and Wales in the last general election. And the big issue was the fall in the Labour vote. We had constituencies that we lost where the Tory vote actually fell, but the Labour vote fell by thousands. And that's about giving people hope. Leaders, like Napoleon said, have to be dealers in hope. And all this, how can we say, oh, energy prices are terrible, we need to control energy prices, but we're opposed to nationalisation? And their attitude will be, well, what's your plan then? And I'll finish on this. We need to talk about the one thing that a lot of people don't want to talk about in the leadership of our movement, is class. I saw somebody on the telly the other day, a Lord somebody, saying, oh, it wasn't a special shooting party, it was just an ordinary shooting party. Now, I think that's a distinction that most working class people won't recognise. And they're living a completely different life to us. They're playing a dangerous game at the moment. They're exposing that life to public spotlight. And people are suddenly saying, we're not all the same. I couldn't go and see my dying grandma or my dying husband, and they were laughing and joking. Somebody said to me the other day on our street, he said, I'd like to get hold of Johnson. And I think the best way to do it would be to announce a cheese and wine evening at my house, and he might turn up. And that's what's happening on the streets. And we've got to reflect that as trade union and Labour movement leaders. We've got to reflect that our class, our people are getting absolutely shattered, and we need to organise it. And we can't do with that without explaining the corruption that's going on and the class nature of the society we live in. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Paul. That's great to hear from you. I hope you enjoy the rest of your presidency. Okay, I'm just going to say that in particular in the context of Kirsty and her care and sport workers Organise campaign, if any of you don't follow Prem Sikka on Twitter, it's certainly worth following Prem Sikka. He has some brilliant ideas, has some brilliant tweets, and had a great question in the Lords last week about care workers. Right, we're going to move to our next section, which is standing up to the racist divide and rule and opposing the Nationality and Borders Bill, which is going through Parliament at the moment. And our first speaker is Akram Salhab from Migrants Organise. The floor is yours, Akram. Unmute. Yeah.
I thought I had done. Thanks, Kirsty, and thanks to the organisers for such a fantastic panel. What I want to talk about is what we need to do from here. I think by now the argument that migrants are the testing ground for the most egregious and dangerous policies that are then extended to all working class communities has now been well established. In terms of workers' rights, in terms of privatisation, charging migrants to use the NHS, a policy which has created a charging system within the NHS that they can now roll out to everybody. Every negative policy in public services and in workers and in communities is first tested very often on migrants. And so because of that, migrants and migrant community organizations have been saying, when each of these bills come by, that we need to stand together against this. This is not just an issue for migrants, but this is the sharp end of an attack against us as a class. And where I work, Migrants Organise, we've been trying to rally, trying to engage people in each time there's a bill passed, each time the situation is made worse and worse. We're in a situation now where a bill is being passed which is quite unbelievable, most famous of which is not Section 9, but the part which is proposing to give the Home Office power to take away the citizenship of people one of whose parents was born abroad, which means that up to 6 million people from BME backgrounds can be stripped of their citizenship without even being told that they've been stripped of their citizenship. And so it doesn't take a very creative mind to imagine how this is going to be used across our communities to weaken and target politically active communities and to weaken our collective solidarity and resistance. Every time there's a bill that passes through Parliament, every time a bill comes to the House of Lords, everybody focuses on lobbying, trying to get people to speak out, trying to prevent it. This is very important work, but we know that it isn't enough. We have to organise on the streets and in workplaces. In other places in the world, when this has happened, there's been collective resistance from migrants. There was a one day without us, one day strike in the US more than once, where the hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets, leaving their workplaces and refusing to open shops and businesses and refusing to work in order to build resistance to a very dangerous piece of legislation that was happening. We need to be more radical. Nothing else is working. We need to come together. We need to coordinate. We need to be more radical in how we resist and how we fight, because our experience now of numerous bills has told us that unless we do that, we are on a path to losing this fight. And, we have to be honest and say that this has happened now in a few immigration bills and we have lost the fight. And this is part of the trajectory we're heading. Now is a moment around the police bill and the immigration and borders bill where I think people recognize how they're intertwined with attack on the working class. And we have to work hand in hand beside each other to find what are effective actions that can actually put pressure on the government passing and advancing these horrendous pieces of legislation. And so I think that's definitely the message that I have today for everyone involved in the trade union movement is, how is the trade union movement struggling for migrant justice? How are migrants in trade unions being stood and supported by their fellow workers? And how are the issues affecting migrants the spark for a collective solidarity and unity and not fragmentation and acceptance of the divisions that this government has tried to use to weaken our communities? So it's fantastic to be on the call with you, and I really hope to continue the struggle together moving forward.
Akram, thank you very much indeed. And we will indeed stand with our comrades who are migrants. Sabby Dhalu from Stand Up to Racism, the floor is yours. We're very much looking forward to hearing from you, Sabby.
Thank you, Christine, and thank you very much to everyone at Arise for inviting me to this important event. Right now, Tommy Robinson is in Telford, whipping up a campaign of racism, Islamophobia, division and hatred. And remember that back in 2019 at the general election, Tommy Robinson called for a vote for Boris Johnson's Tories. And that's because Boris Johnson as Prime Minister is like having Enoch Powell in charge. So let's look at what they've done. So firstly, they've attacked the Black Lives Matter movement. Secondly, they've denied the existence of institutional racism. Thirdly, they have engaged in a propaganda campaign, denying that structural racism is the root cause of BAME communities dying disproportionately and being hospitalized due to COVID. Fourthly, they've sacked Nusrat Ghani because she was Muslim. Fifthly, they've been turning away boats in the Channel full of vulnerable people fleeing war, persecution, climate change, poverty, and so on. People are literally dying because they can't get here safely. And that is a breach of international law. And finally, they are implementing the Nationality and Borders Bill, which is a racist piece of legislation, which is designed simply to appease the likes of Tommy Robinson and the far right. Clause 9 could lead to a repeat of the Windrush scandal and people being deported and losing their citizenship. And it could also criminalize asylum seekers and those that help them. We must oppose this, and all the Labour movement must oppose this. There's also a danger that by the end of March, there could be no COVID public health measures in place. I think we have to support Indy Sage's demands for Vaccine Plus. We've got to have public health measures in place because of COVID. It's not over. It's not the flu. It's not the cold. People are dying. We're just being forced to get accustomed to hundreds of people dying every day. And let's not forget that both the public health crisis due to COVID and the living standards crisis due to the rise in inflation and the government's attacks on the working class impact disproportionately on BAME communities. And regardless of whoever takes over from Boris Johnson, racism will still be at the heart of the government's agenda. Fighting racism is a priority for the left. And I urge you all to join us on Saturday, the 19th of March in London and Glasgow, and Sunday, the 20th of March in Cardiff, saying no to racism, standing up to all forms of racism. And they are the events that Stand Up to Racism is organising with the support of the TUC to mark UN Anti-Racism Day. So I look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you very much, and solidarity.
Thank you very much, Sabby, and I'm sure that as many as people on this call as possibly can will get along to those those events to mark the UN Day of Anti-Racism. I think we know, comrades, that that racism is not just evident in our domestic policy; it's also evident in the international policy of this government, as it has been in many governments previously. So we're now going to entertain some speakers who are going to address that question, the reactionary foreign policy of the international agenda of this government. And our first speaker is Murad Kreshi, who's speaking on behalf of Stop the War. Murad, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christine, for the welcome. And I talk as the ex-chair of Stop the War Coalition, and also I'm on the National Council of CND as well. Because when you talk about Mr. Johnson, quite honestly, I know him too well. I watched him at close quarters for 8 years at City Hall, and he confirms one thing to me when I see him now, that he's always been a fat, lazy sod. And we can see that clearly with foreign policy. If you remember, people often forget that he was Foreign Secretary between 2016 and 2018, when he returned back to Parliament. And the litany of blunders and poor diplomacy at that time is actually very well recorded. by officials there. And the worst example is how he made Naganin Zahari Ratcliffe find herself spending more time in an Iranian jail than need be, quite honestly, given some of the remarks he made in a committee meeting. But since becoming PM, he started off by increasing military expenditure by about 20 billion over the rest of the parliamentary term, in aspiration of getting to the 2% of NATO, 2% of GDP figure that NATO is very keen on. On top of that, he also increased the warheads from 160 warheads to 180 warheads to 260, which is about 15% increase. And this is at a time when the government and the country has signed up to the Non-Proliferation Treaty on Nuclear Warheads. So that's an insight into what he's been up to already. You've got to add other things that he's done over the last 6 months, which shouldn't be forgotten. He's also helped set up a nuclear military partnership between the UK, Australia, and the US, which is basically giving the Australians nuclear submarine technology, again, against the spirit of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and actually exporting technology, whatever way you look at it, to down under, which is a clear breach of the treaties that we've been in keeping with actually up until recently under his term. So we've clearly got to oppose these breaches on the Non-Proliferation Treaty on the streets and legally challenge them. As I said, there's a legal basis to challenge them, as well as lobby our parliamentarians. I've got some hope that we could do something in the Lords. So, Christine, don't be surprised if we come knocking on your door on that front.
Absolutely.
Good to hear. And we've also got to stop him travelling to Eastern Europe. That's what he intends to do. He's basically going over there to be a diplomat over the Ukrainian crisis. We all know it's an attempt to run away from the Partygate affairs here. But given his track record as Foreign Secretary, he's more likely to cause more damage than people appreciate by his blunders, which are more fully been exposed. There is an alternative. It's jaw rather than war. It's using all the peace treaties that we have had historically to get back around a table at least and discuss the matters more clearly. That's not something he's minded to, and neither is he actually responding to the American demands of seizing Russian assets here in London. I, as a Londoner, would welcome that. And if that did materialise out of all the commotion, that may not be a bad plus for us. But I don't see any sight of that, given how reliant the Tory party are now on the Russian ruble. They've had something like 2 million odd pounds worth of rubles given to them over the last few years. And we shouldn't lose sight of that as well in the coming Ukraine crisis and the positions and posturings of the governments in power. So
can I wind you up now?
Yep.
Okay.
Thanks.
Goodness, I didn't mean you to just stop instantly, but anyway, that was great. Thank you very much, Murad. That's terrific.
No problems.
Really, really important that we look, you know, that we show solidarity, global solidarity, and make sure we're on top of our international matters too. Our next speaker is Nathália Urban from Brazil Wire. So, Nathália, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christine. Hello, everybody. We all know Tories are dangerous to people in the UK, but the issue is it's not just in the UK. They are causing death and destruction in the rest of the world as well. From the Venezuelan gold theft to the cheering the Bolivian coup, there is the recent history of the imperialist foreign policy of the conservatives is causing a lot of damage in Latin America. The most specific case being the one back on my homeland, Brazil. At Brazil Wire, we have exclusively published how the foreign policy of the Tories helped in the destruction of the democratic institutions and the demonization of the Workers' Party, the PT. The evidence of Tory support for the coup that removed Dilma Rousseff, or first female president, a former guerrillera who fought against the dictatorship from power, is immense. They never tried to hide that they were excited about the possibility of being able to easily increase the presence of the billionaire corporate partners in Brazil. Reaching so much to, after the coup, Britain opened a fresh consulate in Belo Horizonte, the capital of Minas Gerais, where Brazilian mining operations are historically located, and recently has been the place of two huge environmental disasters, one involving BHP Billington, the disaster in Mariana. I cannot fail to mention that the bogus and now truly discredited Operation Car Wash, that was the main lever used to oust Dilma and to block Lula from running in 2018, was supported by Transparency International, an NGO that received money from Foreign Office and the UK oil industry. Also, the FCO has donated $1 billion every year to the Atlantic Council, a neoliberal think tank that also cheered Lava Jato, the car wash operation, and Rousseff's impeachment. Now, in relation to the post-coup and the rise of Bolsonaro, documents obtained through an FOI and published in a series of reports that we made on Brazil Wire show that the British embassy had meetings with Bolsonaro even before he has announced that he was a candidate. And also that the crimes of the Tories are not just happening here. The UK Foreign and Commonwealth Office has deleted the records of meetings that they hold at the British Consulate in São Paulo regarding companies like Cambridge Analytica and the SCL, which is in breach of their own rules. And before creating conspiracy theories related to a birthday cake, in 2019, the then Trade Minister Conor Burns met with the former Bolsonaro's ally and impeached Governor of Rio de Janeiro, Wilson Witzel, who the arguments were that they went to discuss security and surveillance assistance, which would likely be used against the poor and majoritarian Black communities of favela. In that year, Rio de Janeiro broke records of murders committed by the state police force. Over 180,000 people were died by the hands of the police. A historic record. So those are the peoples that Tory want to align with themselves. The world watched it in amazement, Brazil sinking debts from the pandemic. The country already has more than 500,000 victims, but we can't forget that the herd immunity strategy that has been embraced by Bolsonaro was first used in the UK and boosted by Johnson's own cabinet. And finally, it was absolutely disgusting how the corporate British media sold that the meeting between Boris Johnson and Bolsonaro during the 2021 UN's assembly was that a narrative that Boris Johnson was giving Bolsonaro a moral lesson on account of his vaccine denialism. But this not only shows the arrogance and the Eurocentrism of the British media, but also the inability of them to recognize that the crimes against humanity committed by Johnson are not comparable and they are as horrible as Bolsonaro's crimes. So thank you so much for having me here today.
Thank you very much, Nathália. We must never forget that we need to stand in solidarity with our comrades in Brazil and indeed globally. And so for all you listening, we're now moving into our final section where we're going to be looking at next steps in the fight back. And our first speaker in this section is Mercedes Villalba from, she's an MSP and she's from the Campaign for Socialism in Scotland. Mercedes, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Christine. It's been a wonderful afternoon, really inspiring listening to everyone. I think it was Mark Serwotka earlier on who said that, of course, we want Boris Johnson out. and we want the Tories out, but we don't just want any other government. We want a socialist government that will work in our interests, in the interests of workers. In Scotland, we don't have a Tory government. We have an SNP and Green government. They might be better at saying the right things than the Tories, but they haven't proved any better at reducing poverty or empowering workers. And time and again, we've seen them cut and run down public services, which undermines public confidence in them, and then they get sold off to private companies. Kirsty Turkingdon earlier on talked about the ambition for a national care service in Scotland, but the government up here are not ruling out privatisation. They have recently sold off renewable energy capability through leases to multinationals, and they're continuing to cut public transport, the rail network, and not providing investment for local manufacturing to create jobs here in Scotland. So it's clear, I think, that the only way that we can win the socialist society that we need is by organising collectively to mobilise a force that's so large that it cannot be ignored. So that means having persuasive conversations with everyone that we know to encourage them to join a trade union, to organise in their workplaces, and to build campaigns on issues that matter to our communities, whether that's opposing insecure employment contracts, fighting for rent controls, or calling for public ownership of essential utilities and services. And when we build these campaigns, we can win them, because although the governing party of the day might have their majority in Parliament, we have the majority on the streets. We have the collective power to drive the political agenda and win the changes that we need for a fairer society. So it's brilliant when we have allies in Parliament. We've heard from some today. And of course, we want more workers' representation in Parliament. But we also need to make sure that no matter who is in Parliament, that our movement is organised enough and powerful enough to set the agenda and to push legislators to work in our interests. So I just want to end with an example of what this kind of grassroots organising can achieve. On the 22nd of December last year, a hospitality worker in Dundee sent a WhatsApp message to a group of comrades from a mix of different trade unions, asking for help and advice about a litany of abuses facing workers in the bar where she worked. Over the course of just 1 month, in standing up for her workplace rights, that one worker organised colleagues across 13 venues, reaching well above the 50% density required for trade union recognition. The mistreatment that they raised in their collective grievance, it wasn't new, and each issue had been raised individually through the proper channels time and time again, and they hadn't seen any changes. So what numerous individual workers hadn't been able to achieve alone, when they came together and they organised collectively, in just 1 month, they have seen huge changes. So the employer has met with trade union representatives, they've committed to a full investigation of the allegations, and workers are starting to see missing pay appearing in their bank accounts. But the workers aren't stopping there. They will accept nothing less than trade union recognition and collective bargaining rights. I have no doubt that they will win, and I'll be doing everything in my power as a member of Scottish Parliament to support them in that. So this is how we can win socialist change in our communities, through standing up for our rights, through organising collectively, and through cross-union solidarity. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak. Keep fighting, everyone. Solidarity.
Oh, that's a fantastic contribution, Mercedes. Thank you very much. It put me in mind of a slogan that that trade union comrades use in America, which is united we bargain, divided we beg. And there you are. That's just an absolute indication that that comrade in Dundee clearly was able to get people organised. It may be that she is on the call, because we've certainly got people on the call from Dundee. Our next, so thank you. That's the voice from Scotland. Our next speaker is Beth Winter Mp from Welsh Labour Grassroots. Beth, bore da, you're very welcome. The floor is yours.
Prynawn da, Christine, and diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much for inviting me. It really has been an inspirational afternoon listening to all the other speakers. So I joined the Labour Party in 2016 because I wanted to make a difference, to challenge injustice and inequality and achieve a socialist society. It's not complicated. And then I got parachuted into Parliament. A very dear friend and mentor gave me some really sound advice when I first became an MP, which was the most important work we do, happens outside of Parliament. He was right, and it's what we must do. We must do that now more than ever to challenge this anti-democratic and authoritarian Tory government. Decades of underfunding and austerity have left us, and especially us in Wales, with a legacy of poverty, hardship, and now we're facing a cost of living crisis. This is the reality for so many people, and why we need to look outside of the Westminster bubble and be active in our communities to build a movement, get rid of the Tories. And that is what I've been doing since being elected, working alongside others to build a grassroots movement to bring about bottom-up change. Doing things like setting up advisory groups in my constituency of Cynon Valley on welfare benefits, the economy and the constitution, giving local people a chance to voice their opinions and work together locally to effect change. I've worked with trade unionists locally to help set up a new trades council in my area, trade union membership, as others already said, and the trade union involvement is crucial to our class struggle. I've commissioned research on the post-COVID economy in my constituency of Cynon Valley, taking a community wealth building approach underpinned by the necessity to tackle the climate crisis. And we're now working with others locally to turn the report's recommendations into action. I've also held a series of climate assemblies on green jobs, green transport, green energy, which were attended by over 100 people from a range of groups and organisations. And last week, we held our fourth assembly focusing on turning the ideas into action. As well as local action, I think it would be fair to say that my annual My Dear Country of Wales is a source of inspiration about how things can be done differently under the excellent leadership of First Minister Mark Drakeford. Since the inception of devolution 22 years ago, Wales has always had a Labour-led government, and we have got much to be proud of, like retaining a largely publicly owned NHS and the work we've recently done in establishing a Ministry of Climate Change. We've now entered into a different stage of government through a cooperation agreement between Plaid Cymru and Labour to bring about radical and ambitious progressive policies into being, such as extending free school meals to all primary school children, and we're about to embark on a universal basic income pilot. We in Wales are putting the interests of the Welsh people before those narrow party lines, and in my opinion, more of that is needed. So it's crucial that we unite across different regions, nations and backgrounds, working with a diverse range of political, civic and progressive organisations to build a movement and develop a clear transformative vision to take the fight to the Tories. We need to turn that clear red water, a phrase first coined by Mark Drakeford, into clear red action to give future generations across the UK a fairer, greener, socialist future. Let's look outside of the Westminster bubble. Let's stand together in solidarity and arise. Diolch yn fawr, Christine.
Diolch yn fawr to you too, Beth. Thank you very much indeed. Yes, arise. That was a really inspiring, let's get on with it kind of a contribution. Thank you very much. And now we move to another speaker on the NHS, Holly Turner, who is speaking on behalf of NHS workers Say No, and it's about time they did. Yes, Holly.
Thanks so much, and it's just an honour to follow so many incredible speakers, and we know we're all here because we're rallying against this awful, inept, deceitful government who, led by Boris Johnson, continue to attack our most vulnerable and marginalised in society whilst attacking our workers' rights and our public services. Now, many people who care about their communities and the people that live around them, care about the safety of key workers, will have many stories of loneliness, heartbreak, pain and struggle throughout the pandemic. But our government will never understand this because they didn't abide by their own rules. But really, did we expect anything else but a culture like that from Johnson in Downing Street? While they partied, my partner and I were both working as NHS nurses. We used to work alternate shifts, so one of us could be home with the children, home, stripping at the back door, inside to wash before the children could get close or make contact. And like many other frontline workers, we were terrified. The government has treated NHS workers appallingly, and they have left patient care dangerously compromised. They've refused to pay workers properly whilst wasting billions on dodgy contracts. Public health messaging has been undermined by a government who I don't believe have even attempted to understand how to manage this crisis. Tens of thousands have been allowed to die, with 1 in 6 of these deaths being people with disabilities, and we cannot allow them to treat the very people who need our care most like they are completely disposable. So we need to be applying pressure. We need to stop our politicians looking to private sector providers who have failed the NHS time and time again, and they are not a solution to this mess. We need investment in the future of a fully funded, publicly owned NHS, bringing our outsourced colleagues back in-house, paying staff properly and stopping the Tories from selling it off before there's nothing left. Across the health service, like with many other public sector workers, morale is rock bottom. Staff are leaving and they are not valued by the government. GMB Union this week published results of our NHS staff survey. 71% of all respondents said they'd considered leaving in the past 6 months, citing pay, stress, and their mental health as the reasons for this. Is this any way to treat the people who have kept us safe? And is this in any way sustainable? And we all know the answer. And this is why we're getting organised like never before. We need to be organising collectively. And a key part of that, like all the other speakers have said, is joining a union. Lobby your MPs and local councillors, get active, get involved in campaigns, local and national. If you know of a local picket, join it. If there's a demo, get involved. If you know of local campaign groups, see how you can support. We need to be building a mass movement, linking up our fights and never letting this government divide us, because together we are strong. So keep going, and solidarity.
That's fantastic, Holly. Thank you so much. I've heard you speak before and you are always inspiring. It's absolutely brilliant. Now we come to our final General Secretary of the afternoon. It's Matt Rack from the Fire Brigades Union. Always there, always ready to fight. Matt, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Christine and comrades. What we've heard this afternoon is the huge breadth of struggle facing our people in the current situation, of workers fighting back, of trying to defend our public services, of challenging the cost of living crisis, of trying to defend our rights. We've heard about the horrors of the COVID pandemic. And let's be clear, what we've faced here and globally is an appalling crime against the working class and the poor across the world, as government after government has failed to tackle the pandemic. They were warned, this government was warned as long ago as 2008 about the risks of a new pandemic. That would have required planning, investment, preparation and resources. And of course, they were not prepared to do that. They need to be held to account for that. My own union for the past almost 5 years now has been campaigning to expose another atrocity in relation to the Grenfell Tower disaster. Again, a disaster driven by deregulation and privatisation, pushed by politicians, sadly of all parties, who have sought to deregulate in order to allow profiteering companies to maximise their profits and the money that they make. We've heard that about the threats to Boris Johnson, and we need to be clear, others have made the point, that if Johnson goes, he will be replaced by someone just as ruthless, because what we are facing is a class government embarked in a one-sided class war against our people, our living standards and our public services. And we need to respond likewise as a class, organised as never before. Sadly, I think we need to also face up to some of our political weaknesses, because regrettably, the party that most working people vote for, that our unions built, is not responding as it should be in Parliament. We have instead a leadership of the Labour Party which is embarked on its own war against its own members. And that needs to be challenged. We've got an unprecedented purge of left-wingers within the Labour Party, an unprecedented witch hunt, an attempt to shut down a debate and discussion within the Labour Party in order to make the Labour Party safe for the system. And we have huge battles to face there. I know that time is short, and I just want to finish on one point, Christine. I think that as well as building unity across those struggles, we have to set out our own alternative vision, as comrades have touched on. We need to say that there is a better way of doing things. We've seen the class divisions in this society and across the world exposed over the past 2 years as the pandemic has hit working class people and the poor disproportionately, while others have profited massively from the situation. And we have a different vision, a vision that puts people first before the tiny needs of the profits of the billionaire class. We need a green transition, but for a green transition, frankly, we need a red transition. We need to put the arguments for socialism, for putting the needs of human beings before the needs of profit. A socialist future, that's what we need to put on the agenda, and that's how we unite ourselves. Thanks very much, comrades.
Thank you very much for joining us today, Matt. It's always good to hear from you. And can I just say in passing that that there are comrades in Belfast on the issue of Grenfell who are campaigning for the Ulster rugby team to stop their association with Kingspan, the firm that produced the cladding that turned Grenfell Tower into an inferno. So if you have a chance to get involved in that, I'm sure that would be very welcome. Now, Matt made some comments there about the Labour Party, what it could and should be, and what we would all like to see by way of the future. Well, the future is Young Labour, and so I'm delighted that we have from Young Labour, Daisy Carter. Daisy, the floor is yours.
Hiya, thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute honour to be here this afternoon, following up from some incredible speakers that I'm sure everyone else agree has been like really inspiring. So yeah, as Christine has just said, I am here from Young Labour today, the Young Labour National Committee. So, I mean, kind of to follow on from what's been said already, we know we need to get the Tories out. The Tories do not care about young people and our futures. Our wages have been falling in real terms. The industry that so many of our members work in, like hospitality, have been absolutely decimated during the COVID pandemic. Young people are paying more money to rogue landlords to live in insecure and sometimes outright dangerous accommodation, while the climate crisis is allowed to go on unchecked. Billionaires have been profiting from a pandemic that's killed hundreds of thousands. And we know that the people most affected by this pandemic have been the working class, those in crowded housing with low paid and public facing jobs such as transport workers, not to mention the millions denied vaccines in the global south due to the inhumane patents. But COVID did not create these conditions. It simply exacerbated the inequalities of capitalism. But there is an alternative. We can look for inspiration elsewhere. Our friends in Cuba have been, despite all odds and the blockade going on, been creating vaccines, which have been given to over 80% of their population, and now they're exporting it across the global south to get it to the rest of the world. In Bolivia, we've seen the fascist coup overthrown, and the population has been fought to keep the progress made by the movement towards Socialist Party. And of course, in Chile, where the election of the new socialist government has generated the hope that the birthplace of neoliberalism may also lead to its death there. So, of course, we need to mobilise to get the Tories out, but we must also inspire people with an alternative. In 2017 and 2019, we saw thousands come out to hear that alternative professed by Corbyn. But kind of 5 years on from that, it's time to rebuild. The Labour Party is failing to be at the forefront of this opposition. They've refused to stand strong against the policing bill, and they're not inspiring people to take action. People are taking things into their own hands, demonstrating on the streets to kill the bill and for Black Lives Matter, protesting climate change when they know that our current politicians cannot be relied on to save us. So we've got to build victories in our communities, in our workplaces, organise for better pay and conditions, resisting evictions and cuts to local services. So yes, let's get Johnson out, but we also need to oppose the whole capitalist system and build an alternative to provide real victories for working people. Thank you.
That's great, Daisy. Thank you very much. And it's a real pleasure to know that there are young people in Young Labour who are standing for what we all believe the Labour Party should stand for, which is a socialist alternative. Thank you very much for joining us today, Daisy. Now that brings us almost to the end of our speakers, so I'm just going to permit myself a few remarks before calling our final speaker of the day. Just in case there's anyone who is still joining who didn't hear the opening remarks, this event is being hosted by Organise, a festival of Labour left ideas, along with a whole range of campaigns and publications. as well as trade unions, left organisations, and so on. And I really want to thank everyone who's done work on that. And I want to thank everyone for participating today. We've had fantastic speeches, and I'm sure everyone has been really fired up to get on with things. It's been a really motivating event. I also want to thank, in particular, Patrick and all the team of volunteers who've made this go so smoothly. Look, comrades, our key message from today is that people are on the march against the Tory attacks against health, against trade union rights, against livelihoods. People are on the march in communities and in workplaces across the country. And we all together on this call, we all stand with you and you stand with us. And we're here to offer a platform to keep fighting Boris Johnson and all the Tories, because as we've heard, if we get Johnson replaced, another one will just pop up. And where the Labour frontbench won't or chooses not to take the fight to the Tories, then collectively, we have to do that. We must do it. There is a fight. We have to take the fight to the Tories. So moving forward, we know how important our campaigning is against the Tories' reactionary agenda. And in the Labour Party, we will make sure that this goes on, and we will also stand for Labour Party democracy. And of course, we will fight to ensure that all of those people completely unreasonably excluded from the party are back in and able to use their voices in the party where they should be. Please make sure that you have a look at all of the links that have appeared, so that you can get on with donating, but also get on with being involved in all of the campaigns. In particular, supporting the Workers Can't Wait petition to Rishi Sunak, and that's been posted in the chat. And make sure that you pay attention to Labour Outlook. We have to build the resistance. This meeting today is a small part of that, although it's had some brilliant contributions. We need to make sure that we popularise so that people understand that there really are socialist solutions to the problems that we face. We need to get on and do this together in solidarity. And now, for our closing speaker, who will send us off away with a spring in our step and make sure that we redouble our efforts on all of that campaigning, it's Richard Bergen MP, who is the Secretary of the Socialist Campaign Group in Parliament. Richard.
Thanks very much, Christine, and it's a big burden to place upon me to ensure that everyone goes away with the spring in the step. But I've certainly got a spring in my step after listening to all these fantastic speeches from all these fantastic campaigns from our unions, from different parts of our society. I think it's been fantastic, reminding us that a fight back is taking place, and it's a duty of all of us to stand shoulder to shoulder with everyone fighting back against this Tory government and its unjust, iniquitous agenda. When COVID hit 2 years ago, I think we saw the best in people. We saw people working together against a dangerous threat to health. We saw hundreds of thousands of people volunteering to help our National Health Service. We saw communities helping to protect the most vulnerable, delivering food and delivering prescriptions to the neighbours. Just contrast that with how the Tories have exploited this crisis. Corrupt contracts lining the pockets of their rich mates, using it as a cover to further privatise our NHS, with test and trace showing what they want to do to the whole NHS, breaking the rules because they think they're better than everybody else and that rules only apply to the little people. This should have been a moment to build a better society. Instead, the naked class politics of the Tories has been clear for all to see. And as the Tories ridiculously claim that the pandemic is over because they care more about profit than people, they're preparing another offensive against the majority of people. Tax hikes on working people, while the super rich are let off the hook. Huge spikes in energy prices, while private companies make super profits. Food poverty soaring. Wage cuts for millions as inflation soars. They want the vast majority of people to shoulder the costs of this crisis, but we can stop them. And that's what this meeting today has all been about. The Tories know that their agenda is going to be very unpopular. And that's exactly why they're clamping down on civil liberties and freedoms, because they want to limit the opposition to their policies. That's why they're making it harder to go on strike. That's why they're attacking trade unions. And this week, of course, we saw the trade union tax. That's why they're making it harder to vote with measures targeting black communities, the marginalised and wider working class communities. That's why they're trying to make it harder to protest with their reactionary policing bill. They don't just want to make it harder to oppose them. They want to try and distract blame for their failures. That's why they're whipping up racism against refugees fleeing war and famine. That's why they're pushing forward with their racist nationality and borders bill. And as sure as night follows day, we'll see them trying to turn private sector workers against public sector workers. We'll see them scapegoating disabled people and scapegoating unemployed people as lazy. When they attack the 99%, then divide and rule is all that they have. Against Tory division, we need to build solidarity. Against Tory division, we need to build unity. We need to fight every single attack on our communities, and we need to unite our struggles and support each other's struggles. Boris Johnson has told one lie too many. I think he will be gone soon enough, but we don't just want to get rid of Boris Johnson and then let the Tory MPs and Tory members choose the next Prime Minister. No, we don't just want rid of Boris Johnson. We want the whole lot of them out. We don't just want the whole lot of them out either. We want to replace them with a better society, a society that is fair, that's inclusive, that gives everyone dignity and respect, with a £15 an hour minimum wage to end poverty pay, with a Green New Deal that delivers climate justice and creates millions of skilled, unionised jobs, with the NHS restored as a full public service, with an end to fire and rehire and an end to 0 hours contracts, with millions of new, well-insulated council homes, with a social security system that ensures a dignified minimum income guarantee and doesn't treat disabled people like dirt, with a right to food, with a national care service so people are treated with dignity in their old age, with wealth taxes on the super rich, not cuts to our key services. But we know, don't we, that we will only build such a society if we fight this government in every community and against every attack. There's much to be disillusioned with in politics at the moment, but the increasing fight back from our trade unions is a big step forward. And over the past 18 months or so, we've seen, as this meeting has showcased, big protest movements on climate change, against racial injustice, and to address women's safety. We need to build on that grassroots fight back. Now, I know that that feels exhausting and difficult at times, but let me tell you, let me give you an example from this week that I think can show you why we all have to keep on going. 13 years ago, there was a US-backed coup in the small Central American country of Honduras against a new left-wing government. President Manuel Zelaya was marched off in his pajamas in the middle of the night by the military, a coup backed by the United States government against a left-wing government. But the people of Honduras didn't give up. They fought back against widespread human rights abuses, against torture, against blatant electoral cheating, against huge corruption. They didn't give up. And this week, Xiomara Castro, a leader of the resistance movement against that coup, was inaugurated as president of that country, as president of Honduras. So even though the odds were against them, they didn't give up and they triumphed. And so even though the odds are often against you and against us, when you keep on going and keep on fighting, then you can win. So let's all of us go forward knowing that tens of millions of people are opposed to this rotten government. Let's go forward knowing that millions of people are having their eyes opened to the way our ruling elite works to protect itself and to stick the boot in to the rest of us. Let's go forward together, knowing that poll after poll shows that people do want a better society. And let's go forward together, knowing that when we struggle and when we're united, there's no power on earth that can stop us. Let's keep at it. Let's keep on going. Let's support each other. Let's be part of that widespread, diverse fight back in Parliament, on the protests, on the picket line, in the streets, in our communities. Together, we can be that unstoppable force of change that can win despite the previous defeats, despite the odds. Thank you very much.
Richard, thank you very much. That was an absolutely brilliant conclusion, and I'm sure this meeting is delighted to send solidarity to the first woman president of Honduras. So with thanks again to all of our brilliant speakers and contributors. Thanks again to everyone who joined, who watched on Facebook or Twitter, who came in live. Make sure that you do all of the activities that are suggested and join any kind of resistance and fight back that there is locally or nationally. And with that, comrades, I say goodbye and solidarity.